How can you be a humanitarian and a socialist for your entire life and say something that is patently false, objectively untrue? You are not on the campaign right now. You are simply talking to Hasan Minhaj. Okay? There is no reason for you to shelter unless this is like actually what you think. Here, let's listen to what he had to say.
Increasing the minimum wage, free tuition, LGBTQ rights. You've been talking about universal health care since Star Wars A New Hope was in theaters in 1978. Essentially, what you've been doing for the past 40 years is just doing what I do with my kids. Put on your shoes. Hey, put your shoes on. Stop. Put your shoes on. Put your shoes on. Please, for the love of God, put your shoes on.
The health care is a right of all of its people.
That health care is a right of all people. Health care is a right of all people. Health care is a right of all people. Health care is a right of all people.
You've been saying put your shoes on for the past 40 years. Senator Sanders, do you ever feel like blowing your brains out?
Occasionally.
Because my daughter is in the first grade. She hasn't even gotten to the first grade. And
Sounds like you feel like blowing your brains out.
Daily, Senator Sanders.
Don't do it. It's not the solution to the problem.
That was kind of funny. I'm not gonna lie. It was a good, strong start. He just straight up asked Bernie if he wants to kill himself, dude. That's insane.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bernie Sanders. Yeah.
There's almost as many people in the room here as there were last night.
Senator Sanders, do you need a little?
Jane, how's my hair?
Jane?
Oh, you're on?
How's
yes. Yes, fine.
All right.
That's fine.
You know there's a barbershop over there we can get you.
No, I'm not kidding.
I'm not kidding. This is true love. This is real love. This is Sanders, this is real love. Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I want to start by exposing a secret about you. I know this is going to be a little intense, but it's going to shock the conscience of the American public. Senator Sanders, how tall are you?
6 feet. Television makes you short and fat. And for some reason, no matter how I sit, I look fatter than I am. I'm not that fat, folks.
You're not
but
fat.
I am 6 feet.
I'm not fat shaming you. But there is this notion that you're a short king, but you were a tall comrade.
Now that we've gotten through the important stuff.
All right.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to the real stuff.
Yeah.
As someone who has covered the DNC for a long time, I've been there. It's felt electric in a way that I haven't felt in a long time. But I'm also seeing Democratic Party leadership and solidarity like I've never seen before. There's no sneak dissing, there's no disorder, there's no infighting. Progressives and neoliberals arm in arm. Senator Sanders, we had yourself, AOC, and JB Pritzker, a billionaire, all on stage together. So my question to you is, are we witnessing the rise of a more unified Democratic Party, or is this a Donald J. Trump is an existential threat one-off?
Well, it depends. I don't know that we know the answer to that. What I think we do know, which is clear, is that Donald Trump is the most dangerous candidate in perhaps the history of this country. And it's not only...
Bro, there's no fucking... What are we talking about, dude? If there's a unified party on that front, then it's just done. It's lost.
Because of his terrible positions on all of the issues that I'm sure your listeners and viewers are familiar with. He is an authoritarian personality and will move this country in an authoritarian direction, the likes of which, I think it's hard to appreciate. So he's extremely dangerous. And I think what that reality has done is brought a whole lot of people to say, hey, you know what? We got to defeat this guy. We have to.
Biden has the most progressive agenda of any president since FDR. Why are we talking about him like he's Bill Clinton? I'm sure Bernie will address that because Bernie considers himself to be a junior partner that was heard in the Biden administration. Except Biden kind of fucked it up. Biden is a progressive. Yes, Biden on labor was a more progressive administration than Barack Obama. Biden on labor and labor alone, and in terms of how he communicated a lot of these like radical, progressive. So Kamala is more progressive than Biden. Kamala is nothing. We don't know. All we have are her policies, which she surprisingly at this point, confusingly, has none. So I don't know. It's like when chatters come in here and go, dude, we actually shouldn't even be pushing for a ceasefire. We should be pushing for the complete dissolution of the apartheid state. And it's like, I agree with you, But like, how the fuck am I going to sit here and outflank Hamas on this? You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about? All right, let's continue.
And Tim to the administration, and we go from there.
Are progressives and liberals, in your opinion, because of this existential threat, finally learning how to work together? Because
Well,
things were
that's
different.
it's a complicated question. I think what you have, and it's the idea of coalition politics is something that we're not familiar with in the United States. It exists in Europe all over the place. It did recently in France, as you may be familiar with.
Right.
There was a threat of a right-wing movement, Le Pen, similar to Trumpism, and the left, including moderates and center-left and further left people came together and say, we can't allow this to happen in France. So right now we are united in an honest way to defeat Donald Trump, but do not minimize the differences that exist between progressives and corporate Democrats.
In your speech at the convention, you said that you wanted a ceasefire in Gaza.
We must end this horrific war in Gaza, bring home the hostages, and demand an immediate ceasefire.
Huge applause break moment in the United Center. It was pretty amazing. Everyone cheered. It really was a moment. But I want to talk about that word ceasefire. It means something very different for different people. The meaning of that word seems to be changing in real time. Senator Sanders, what is your definition of the word ceasefire?
If you allow me, let me back it up a little bit,
Sure,
and I'll
please.
get there. Okay.
And it's just walking us through.
Yeah.
That's a great question, by the way. It's correct. The Democratic Party, if you follow Adam Johnson, formerly of Fair Media, he talks about this quite a bit. He's written about this on, I believe, The Nation as well, where the definition of the ceasefire is something that the Democratic Party basically changed. When they say they're looking for a ceasefire, they mean something different, right? When the public says we want a ceasefire, they want a cessation of hostilities completely. Whereas the Democrats keep saying, "Oh, we're working towards a ceasefire," and it's like originally they used to say a temporary ceasefire, temporary halt. Then they started saying ceasefire, and then obviously the Israeli government's understanding of a ceasefire is very different than the Democratic Party's understanding of a ceasefire. They used to say humanitarian pause. Yeah, remember?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go through with what happened. On October 7th, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, invaded Israel and killed 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, took 200 hostages. They are a terrorist organization. Bad news, guys. Israel responded as any government would respond to an attack like that. Israel had the right to defend itself. But what has happened since then is rather than just go after Hamas, a terrorist organization, what Israel, under an extreme right-wing government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who has in his cabinet people to the right of him who are out and out anti-Palestinian racist. No ifs, buts, and matters. These are racist. So this is the cabinet. What they have done is say, hey, we're not just going to go after Hamas, we're going to go after the Palestinian people. And the carnage has been horrific. And
I'm going to run this back. I'm sorry. I have to hear it again because I heard him go,
organization invaded and
yeah, he
killed
says
1,200
Hamas, a terrorist
innocent men,
organization that
women,
invaded Israel.
children, took 200 hostages. They are a terrorist organization. Bad news, guys. Israel responded as any government would respond to an attack like that. Israel had the right to defend itself.
Boo! No, it doesn't. How can you be a fucking humanitarian and a socialist for your entire life and say something that is patently false, objectively untrue? You are not on the campaign right now. You are simply talking to Hasan Minhaj. Okay? There is no reason for you to shelter unless this is like actually what you think. Okay? And this is actually what he thinks. He thinks Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel does not have a right to defend itself as a belligerent occupier over Palestinian occupied territories. That's just like, oh.
What has happened since then is rather than just go after Hamas, a terrorist organization.
Like this is rather than just go after Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, is literally the justification that Israel uses. It's not like Israel saying, we are going to kill Palestinians. They're saying, we're going after Hamas. Plenty of fucking liberal Zionists also say Israel has a right to defend itself by going after Hamas.
What Israel, under an extreme right-wing government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who has in his cabinet people to the right of him who are out and out anti-Palestinian racist. No ifs, buts, and matter. These are racist. So this is the cabinet where they...
This is not unique to like Itamar Ben-Gvir, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bezalel Smotrich. Okay? This is something that like Israeli society, according to numerous polls since October, specifically, and this is Israel's own designation, the Jewish society in Israel, the Jewish demographic of Israelis, have been overwhelmingly in support of, if not demanding more of, a country where, by the latest polling, okay, 66% of them said they didn't want the people who are being investigated for rape to have any criminal trial. And only 21% said they think a trial should take place. That right there is how far out Israeli society is. Now, let me explain something to you. You might be wondering, well, if Israel is so fucking racist, so crazy, why did they even do a trial, or why did they even detain some of these rapists in the Sdei Teiman facility to begin with? The answer is simple. It's complementarity, okay? A principle known as complementarity dictates that as long as Israel is prosecuting some of its own war criminals for some of the war crimes that they engage in, then they can use that as a shield to not get prosecuted by the ICC. And that is the reason why they did that. Okay? They have to at least play pretend, like they're playing by the rules, like there is a democratic process. Okay? That's the reason why they did it. And even then, Israeli society was like, fuck no, we're not doing that shit. Get out of here.
They have done is say, hey, we're not just going to go after Hamas. We're going to go after the Palestinian people. Mm-hmm. And the carnage has been horrific. And we are looking at the worst humanitarian disaster, one of the worst in modern history. And I've been on the floor talking about this a whole lot. So it's not just 30,000. They got a population there in Gaza, 2.2 million, 30,000 dead. Mostly women, children, and the elderly. Over 80,000 injured, mostly women, children, and the elderly.
Yes.
You got 1.8 million people, 3/4 of the population displaced. You got it? Taken out of your home.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you moved again, and then you moved again. And it's a young population, a lot of children, okay? You got 65% of the housing damaged or destroyed. Got that?
Right.
So we don't know where these people are going to go back to. There are 12 universities in Gaza. Guess what? Every single one of them has been bombed. They had a fairly decent healthcare system, systematically destroyed. Very few functioning hospitals right now. You got no electricity in Gaza right now. And then as a result of Israel's efforts to deny humanitarian aid, to block humanitarian aid, you're now looking at the possibility of mass starvation, and children right now are malnourished. And
my expectations from Bernie Sanders is higher because he is one of the only politicians in American politics as a prominent Jewish politician that has actively talked about conditional weapons transfers to Israel far before October 7. Even talking specifically about like denying any, putting sanctions or denying any aid to Israel whatsoever. Okay? What is shocking to me is that he keeps repeating falsehoods. October 7 is the first time this ever happened. October 7 is when, Hamas, a terrorist cell, waged war on Israel. This is an abject denial of reality. Okay? What do I mean by this? It is an abject denial of reality because Hamas is not born out of like Jew hatred, okay? Or born out of anger and resentment. It's born out of a genuine need for resistance against an apartheid regime. Okay? So saying like, oh, well, on October 7th, they did this, and then Israel had a right to defend itself. literally just rips away necessary context in this equation. Okay? That's it. That's why I'm very frustrated, because the necessary context is 75 at that moment, 75 years of ethnic cleansing and apartheid. If you don't understand that, then yeah, you're like, whoa, what the fuck? Why'd they do that? Shit was so neat. It wasn't. And I understand as a prominent politician, like what you can say and what you can't say. Okay. But there's a better way to not engage in any kind of fucking apartheid denial.
When you're a child, malnourished, that's permanent. I mean, you may not necessarily die. It'll impact your...
The dude in this tweet is labeled a terrorist. He's a militia leader in the West Bank, but the quote perfectly encapsulates what you're saying. I can't stay home waiting for a bulldozer to demolish the home over my head. No, I have to destroy the bulldozer before it gets to me. Yeah. Resistance will continue. Life and legacy of Muhammad Jabir Abu Shuja. If the enemy assassinates me, we will continue. The struggle does not end with one person. There are generations that rise to defend our rights.
Intellectual development.
Anyway.
Emotional development. So you got a horror show.
That's
now, what
wild.
bothers me, I would hope that bothers anybody.
Of course.
But what is even worse is a lot of this is being done with U.S. taxpayer dollars. So what I have insisted on from day one, and one of the few, is to say, you know what? Not another nickel to Netanyahu's extremist government to continue the war against the Palestinian people.
Our new position must be simple and straightforward. Not another nickel for the Netanyahu.
Israel set the standard and conditions for October 7 to happen. Many Israeli officials recognized that ahead of time and literally said that October 7, or a likely scenario like October 7, could potentially happen if Israel continued increasing the pressure on the West Bank. Okay, which they did. Israel also personally moved military units away from the Gaza envelope near the border wall to the West Bank in an effort to conduct purges and pogroms in the West Bank. These were all of the major reasons as to how October 7 happened. Israel is mostly responsible for October 7. That is not a position I've strayed away from. That doesn't change the reality that October 7 had a litany of atrocious actions that took place, including mass death of civilian casualties.
Government if their present policies continue.
As we speak, there's more military aid going to Netanyahu, and I'm going to do my best to block it. Do I think we'll win? No. But there is a provision that you have to block that kind of military aid, and I will do my best to block it.
As I read and internalize the news, they're giving me these updates on the negotiations, and it feels almost like the iTunes user agreement, where it's, we all want a ceasefire, but ceasefire if, ceasefire but. Help me understand that.
Well,
Is
I
it
can.
conditional or an
I mean,
unconditional?
look, you're asking a very fair question.
Okay.
And it's just not, I have not been involved day-to-day
Okay.
ceasefire.
I gotta go
So
wash
it's a
my
good
hands.
question. Don't know the answer. All that I do know.
Can you help me frame this?
Well, sure. I
Blinken-
mean, look,
Blinken
if
is framing-
you're Hamas, right? What do you want? If you want a ceasefire, which I suspect they may want it, you want to protect your interests as best you can. Right. If you're Israel, you want to minimize or diminish Hamas to the degree you can. So I suspect within that framework, that's what these discussions are about.
Do you feel the U.S. has a role as a neutral broker between these two sides?
U.S. is not a neutral broker. U.S. is significantly supporting the Netanyahu government.
Okay.
Not neutral, but I think, and what we focus rightfully so on Gaza, but I hope everybody understands there's another part. There's the West Bank, where you're seeing unprecedented vigilantism against Palestinian landowners and homeowners as well. So look, the role that the United States can play is Israel has been dependent on U.S. financial support and military support for a long time. And what we have got to say to them, if you want another nickel, sorry, this is the way it's going to be. At the very least, there's going to be a Palestinian state. Palestinian people need their own political and economic entity. And we are not going to be providing you any more weapons so long as you're going to war against the Palestinian people.
You're obviously in the Senate. Let's talk about the House. Back in April, there was a bill to approve billions in military aid for Israel that went through Congress. Out of the roughly 200 House Democrats, only 37 voted against military aid. So just so folks understand kind of the way the voting works, Over 80% of House Democrats,
And
We're
virtually
good.
all Republicans, I would imagine.
correct,
Yeah.
were good on sending
Yeah.
aid. Okay. Yesterday, I was at the United Center. You say the word ceasefire, incredible applause break. So what I'm hearing at the convention is from the Democratic Party is yay ceasefire, and simultaneously from 80% of those members of Congress, I'm also hearing yay weapons.
The convention is, thousands of people. It's a small number of people.
Right.
If you do polling today, I think if you ask a simple question and you say, do you think your taxpayer, American taxpayer dollars, should go to support the Netanyahu government and the continuation of the war? I suspect a pretty strong majority of Americans would say, no, I don't. And among Democrats, the numbers would be very high. So if your question is Congress, I think your question is reflecting where the American people are at.
Correct.
The answer is no, they're not.
Why is that?
Well, it is the same answer that I would give you if you asked me, gee, how come every other major country on earth has healthcare as a human right and we don't? And polls show that the majority of the American people want healthcare as a human right. How come we don't tax billionaires?
Here's a good question. What would the reaction been if the USA did nothing after 10-7? Even if we don't like it, Israel's a steadfast American ally. Can we literally just ditch an ally like that? Wouldn't that be a horrible look? What was America supposed to do? I'm not calling for the continued support, but didn't they have to do something? Fuck no. On October 10, after meeting with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Anthony Blinken literally called for restraint on Israel's actions, okay, in a tweet, and then immediately deleted it. They knew back then what the fuck Israel was going to do, okay? Everybody with eyes with a brain knew exactly what Israel was about to do. You're out of your fucking mind, dude. How about the real bad look? America can't even look like it can restrain its own fucking attack dog in the goddamn region and keeps fucking funneling endless weapons to its attack dog in the region, which is an objectively fascist, bloodthirsty, monstrous, NC-style, Nazi Germany-style country at this point.
At a higher rate when the American people think we should. And the answer to all of those questions is the same. And I tried to talk about that a little bit last night. It is the role of money in politics. So right now, both major political parties, Democrats and Republicans, are funded very heavily by the wealthiest people in this country. And if you were a billionaire and you wanted to start a super PAC, you could put hundreds of millions of dollars into campaigns to defeat people who opposed you and to support your friends who will support your agenda.
2 out of those 37 House members that voted against the weapons bill were Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush.
That's right.
They recently lost their primaries. Why did they lose their
Well,
primaries?
that's good. And they lost their primaries because a super PAC, AIPAC, put an unprecedented amount of money. I was involved in both of their campaigns, Jamal's more than Cori's, but we helped Cori raise money. And the reason is the billionaire class does not want strong opposition to the billionaire agenda. And in Jamal, you had somebody who was strongly opposed to it. And it's not just on Israel, where his views were not probably dissimilar to mine or Cori's, but on other issues as well. So what you got, and let me repeat this because it's not talked about enough. Yeah, do we have a democracy? Yes, you can go out and vote. That's great. And please, everybody, go out and vote. But what most of you cannot do is put hundreds of millions of dollars into a super PAC to elect candidates you want or defeat candidates you don't like. So there's a super PAC out there. They went after Jamal in an unprecedented way, defeated him. Went after Cori, defeated her. And that is the power of money in politics. And that is why it is absolutely imperative that we get rid of this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United and move to public funding of elections.
Right.
This is just money. Look, it is not complicated. If you are, this gentleman over here, probably not, you're a billionaire, and you didn't like Bernie Sanders, or you don't like Cori Bush, you don't like Jamal Bowman, you can start a super PAC, Friends of America, call it whatever you want. You could take out a check, put $500 million into that check, get a few of your friends to contribute, and you go after them, put ads on TV. That's legal. That's what Citizens United allows us to do. Nothing conspiratorial about it. That is the reality of American politics. That's going on in both political parties. Check out the amount of money that billionaires are now contributing both to the
Einstein kind of was one. Yes. Except at that time, even at that time, with the rose-tinted glasses that many labor Zionists were looking at Israel as a nation-state project, Einstein was one of the few people immediately who was like, "Oh, this shit is fascist, bro. Don't do this." He literally said, "Don't do this. This is some straightforward fascism."
Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And that will answer your question, I think, not only about the war in Gaza, it's why we don't have healthcare as a human right, why we have massive income and wealth inequality, why we have a corrupt tax system, why we are not able to send our kids to college and make it affordable, et cetera, et cetera. It's money. Money talks.
I want to talk about your career in politics. You have been propping open the Overton window for the past 40 years. And 8 years ago, a bunch of my friends were just hunched over a laptop on Reddit, vaping, on their phones, just going, you know what? This guy makes a lot of sense. Does it ever get exhausting seeing how slow it takes for the electorate to eventually catch up to ideas that feel so basic?
They feel basic, but there's an idea that I think people don't comprehend, is that the people on top have enormous power. Just think, I'm a little bit older than you. So when I was a kid, people of your color, I couldn't drink at a water fountain in Mississippi. Okay?
Yeah.
Go to segregated schools.
Yeah, look. 1948, New York Times publishes letter by Einstein, other Jews accusing Menachem Begin of fascism. Lest America be fooled by post-independence rhetoric, the Harut Party Begin Begin led was closely akin to the Nazi and fascist parties, they wrote.
Etc. It took God knows how long for people to stand up and fight against segregation and racism. It took a very long time. People died in the struggle. Okay? And sheriffs going out there and they shot people and they lynched people. You know, there's a movie on Emmett Till and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's photos of you marching in the Civil Rights Movement. Yeah.
My point is, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but in the real world, when you take on people with power, they don't fold up and they don't say, you know, Hasan, you made a good point. Hey, we're going to provide health care to all people. Geez, why didn't I think of that? I'm a smart guy. It doesn't work like that. These people have power and they have money and they're extremely greedy.
You're telling me a witty, top pinned comment can't take down the billionaire class?
Well, it takes,
Excuse me.
yeah, but it takes, you have to think that one through. Taking down the billionaire class ain't easy. They own the media, all right? You know, they have enormous power in both political parties. They are very, very powerful people. So that you don't win and change the world overnight, well, I'm sorry, that's the bad news. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen in the Civil Rights Movement. You know, women, I mean, I can remember, it wasn't so many years ago, this is true. I mean, this is how quickly your generation may not know this. But not so many, a few decades ago, in the United States Senate, 100 people, there were 2 women, 98 men, 2 women. The idea of somebody like Kamala Harris running for president, a woman, a black woman, people literally would have said to you,
Bernie.
"You are absolutely crazy. That ain't never going to happen in 100 years.
Right.
All right. My point is, change happens. We have got to make that change happen faster. But anyone who thinks it happens overnight, it doesn't. You have friends, I suspect, who are gay, right? 30, 40 years ago, people didn't talk about being gay. Now you have a Secretary of Transportation who is gay. You've got governors who are gay.
Right.
All right, that didn't happen by accident. People fought and struggled.
Senator Sanders, unfortunately, this position has been framed I believe at times you've been framed in the media as this kind of radical person.
Good point.
But I want to talk about your Guardian article, because what you did is you conducted your own research and you showed that these progressive policies are actually super popular, 10 toes on the ground. This is not a Twitter position. This is not an Instagram stories position. Real IRL Americans care about these issues. How much of a gap do you think is there between your platform in 2020, these issues that we talk about that we feel are common sense, and the Harris-Walz platform of 2024?
Well, they don't have a platform yet. They're working on it. You know, in fairness, and it's an important point to make, she has been a candidate now for all of a month.
Right.
Can you imagine what fell on her shoulders? I mean, having to organize the campaign. She got a lot of folks from Biden's campaign, but to organize that, to plan out the rallies that you have to do, to plan out the convention that is now taking place, to select a vice presidential candidate, to work on policy stuff. I mean, that is a lot to do in a month, and I think she's been doing a very good job. What I will say, and I want to pick up on the point you made and amplify it.
About the Guardian article.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. What we did.
Please do, because I ran out of free articles, so I didn't get to read all of it. I stopped halfway through.
What we did is we said, look, I'm called a far left guy. Decided that Kamala Harris is a communist. I mean, totally insane. So we asked the American people a lot of simple questions about some of the major issues facing this country, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. So we said, do you think that the wealthy and large corporations should pay more in taxes? Shock of all shocks, over 70% of the American people said yes, including a majority of Republicans. Should we be surprised? No.
No.
All right.
Yeah, of course.
Question, should we raise Social Security benefits by lifting the cap on taxable income and extend life by 75 years? In other words, asking the wealthy to contribute more into Social Security. Over 70% of the people said yes. Should we raise the minimum wage to a living wage? American people overwhelmingly said yes. Should we expand Medicare? Right now, Medicare is a good program. It doesn't cover dental, hearing, and vision. Should we expand it? Over 70%? In all these instances, a majority of Republicans. So your question, I think, is, if the American people feel that way, why, A, haven't we done it? Why aren't people?
Yeah, why haven't they been implemented?
And the answer, the answer gets back to what I said a moment ago. It's money. The insurance companies don't like the idea. The rich don't like the idea of paying more in taxes. The insurance companies don't like the idea of expanding Medicare.
Is there a realistic path for my generation to remove money from politics? Is this something?
Goddamn right there is.
You think so?
Yeah.
I'm
I mean, what
38.
you got to do.
Hopefully I have a long way to go.
All right. The answer is, of course, there is. Money has always played a role in politics, but it was greatly accentuated by this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So we need legislation to get rid of Citizens United and to move to public funding of elections. If you do that, there will no more be super PACs. Billionaires will not be able to play the role they're playing right now. And again, not a radical idea. Mm-hmm. This exists in many other countries around the world.
I hope we do change it, and I hope we do remove money from politics, because we still don't have Medicare for all. Minimum wage is still at $7.15, which is crazy. When I worked at Safeway in 2003 in Davis, California, I think I was $7.25, and we are still paying other countries to bomb civilians. I want to ask you about your legacy and what you represent in American politics. Do you ever feel like you failed because these things haven't happened? No. Or do you feel like a success because these things are now part of the regular conversation?
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with people like Pramila Jayapal and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Maxwell Frost and many others. Look, what is, again, an untold story. In the Congress right now, and I just saw Pramila this morning, actually, is there are almost 100 members of the Progressive Caucus, and a significant number of them are young, often women, people of color. That's a revolution. Never, ever, ever have you had more progressives who are fighting to transform this country in profound ways. Never before have there been that many in the House of Representatives. That isn't true in the Senate. We don't have that in the Senate. But in the House, that exists. And I'm proud that my two campaigns have gotten a lot of people to say, you know what, I think I can run. What Bernie is saying makes sense to me. That's an agenda that I think I'm going to run for office. Not only for
how powerful is that?
Oh, my goodness.
How much can Congress change the fate of the country and the way money is moved through the country?
They can pass legislation which gets money out of politics. That's what I'm saying. You can pass legislation. Super PACs are not biblical. They're not inherent. You can get rid of them tomorrow if you had the legislation to do it, and that's what we're going to do.
I have so many friends that were Bernie or bust. And when you didn't win in 2016 or 2020, they bust. They checked out of politics, and then they hard pivoted into Bitcoins.
Wow, really?
Then they pivoted into ketamine and Zyn. Let's see where that goes. But they are despondent. Jokes aside, they're despondent, Senator Sanders. Where does that leave your supporters that saw so much hope in the values you were espousing? And what do you say to my friends who now feel like you may be falling in line a little bit too much with the corporate Democratic establishment?
Well, look, at this particular moment in history, and perhaps in any moment in history, despair is not an option. To say, well, I supported Bernie, he didn't win, I'm going into Bitcoin. Sorry, not good enough. All right.
That's going to be your most controversial statement of this whole interview.
All right. There is a reality out there. And the reality is that Donald Trump is not only an authoritarian person, he is a xenophobe. He tries to divide us up by the color of our skin or where we were born. You're familiar with the Muslim ban, to say the least, and so forth and so on. So I think, not to mention a dozen other issues. So I think if you are a human being who wants to live in a sane and decent society, who is concerned about your kids, you know what? Sorry, you don't have a right to check out. That's a privilege you don't have. You're gonna have to do what people historically have done. You know, I just came from a meeting an hour ago with trade unionists. There was a time in this city where union people, I'm talking 100 years ago, were beaten up because they wanted to join a union. They were denied food, they were thrown out when they went out on strike. And they stood up and they fought so that people can earn a decent standard of living. You know, women didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have property rights. They stood up and they fought back.
And it was
So
great.
now we have today a woman who rests on the shoulders of those women who struggled for 100 years. You have a civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King was here in the city, you know, fighting for justice. Got shot trying to organize work with workers. So people say, oh my goodness, my candidate didn't win, I'm dropping out, even though the candidate was made. Sorry, I lost, I was there, I'm not dropping out. You got to look at the world as it is and do the best you can. And people can disagree. Hasan, what is the best? How do we go forward? But dropping out is certainly not one of the options.
Feels crazy to have him. Feels crazy to have him keep saying my name.
So I'm 38. A lot of our viewers are around my age. You're
Right.
83. We have a long way to go to become your age and to have
Right.
your
I
wisdom.
wanna-
How should we apply the next
Right.
decades of
Two
our life?
things.
We're first
I mean, I think-
generation. A lot of us are first generation kids.
Well, I'm first generation, not a kid. Also, first generation old.
I'm a man. I'm a man now.
So my father came from Poland. I think immediately we got to elect Kamala Harris. But second of all, we have got to keep our eyes on an agenda that speaks to the needs of working people. And by the way, not only is it not a radical agenda, we just discussed how American people support, this exists all over the world.
Right.
I live 50 miles away from Canada. You go in a hospital in Canada for 3 weeks. You know what the bill is when you come out? Do you know? Zero. It's zero.
Yeah.
It's publicly
say
funded.
nominal, yeah.
It's a human right. And by the way, they spend 50% of what we spend per capita on healthcare. All right. You go to Finland and countries. You know what childcare costs or college education? Virtually free. Because they understand they want a well-educated country. They want the kids to do well. These are not radical ideas. They really are common sense ideas supported by the majority of the American people. So what I'm asking your viewers and your listeners to do is to stay focused on the issue. Don't let politicians get off the hook saying, oh, well, yeah, I want to improve healthcare. Well, what do you mean? Can I go to any doctor that I want without taking out my wallet? Well, I'm not talking about that. What do you mean by that? Should we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? Or should we pay what other countries are paying? So be thinking about what you want as the future of this country and demand the politicians deliver it.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
This was really
I'm not gonna lie, the interview kind of knocked the wind out of my sails a little bit. I don't know why. It made me kind of sad. Because like Kamala Harris' campaign is just not gonna listen. Because like right after we watch this interview, we're gonna dive into Dana Fash talking to Kamala Harris, where she's going to say like she wants to appoint Republicans into her cabinet and a bunch of other dumb shit.